Rain tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the office overlooking the Sicilian coastline. One of Italy's most feared mafia bosses sat alone behind an enormous mahogany desk, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the storm rolling across the Mediterranean. The wedding ring he'd never stopped wearing rested beside a glass of untouched whiskey. His phone rang. Cassiano Moretti almost ignored it. Unknown number. His tattooed hand, the knuckles bearing the words Onore Dolor, finally reached for the device. "Mr. Moretti?" A woman's calm voice. "Professional. I'm calling from St. Lucia Children's Medical Center." His expression barely changed, until she quietly added, "You have a 3-month-old son." The glass slipped from his fingers, shattered across the marble floor, because 15 months earlier, his wife had disappeared forever. Or so he thought. Before we begin, thank you for spending part of your day with me. Whether you're listening from home, at work, while traveling, or before bed, I'm truly grateful you're here. Tonight's story is about love, regret, forgiveness, and the life-changing power of second chances. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from so I can see just how far across the world this story has reached. Now, let's begin today's unforgettable story. The silence that followed lasted exactly 7 seconds. 7 seconds during which Cassiano Moretti, a man who had ordered executions without flinching, who had built an empire on blood and precision, who had never once shown weakness in front of anyone, could not form a single word. His throat closed, his chest tightened, the Italian script tattooed on his neck, *ogni celta ha un prezzo *, seemed to burn against his skin. Every choice has a price. "Mr. Moretti?" The woman's voice again. "Patient. Are you still there? Who is this?" His voice came out rough, fractured. "My name is Dr. Bianca Ferraro. I'm a pediatrician at St. Lucia Children's Medical Center in Florence." Florence. Not Sicily. Not Rome. Florence. Over 500 kilometers from the last place he'd seen her face. "The child," he stopped, swallowed, started again. "The mother. What is her name?" A pause on the other end. "Elisabetta Santoro." The name hit him like a bullet to the chest. Cassiano's free hand gripped the edge of his desk so hard the wood groaned beneath his fingers. The Roman lion tattooed on his right forearm, the beast holding a broken sword, seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. "Is she—" The words caught. "Is she alive?" "Yes." Dr. Ferraro's voice softened slightly. "She's stable now, but there were complications during delivery 3 months ago. She's been recovering slowly, and last week she developed a secondary infection. She's conscious but weak. She asked me to contact you." She asked, after 15 months of silence, after walking away without a word, after vanishing from his life so completely that even his most skilled men couldn't find her. She had asked someone to call him. "The child," Cassiano said again. "My son. Niccolo," Dr. Ferraro said quietly. "His name is Niccolo." Cassiano closed his eyes. For a moment, he was no longer a 40-year-old mafia boss sitting in his fortress overlooking the sea. He was just a man learning that he had missed the first 3 months of his son's life. That somewhere in Florence, a woman he had driven away was raising their child alone. That she had needed help so desperately that she'd finally reached out to the man who had destroyed everything. "I'll be there in 3 hours," he said. "Mr. Moretti, visiting hours." 3 hours. He ended the call. The phone slipped from his fingers onto the desk. And Cassiano Moretti, one of the most feared men in Italy, pressed both palms flat against the mahogany surface and let his head fall forward. His shoulders shook once. Just once. Then he straightened, pulled his phone toward him again, and made a call he should have made 15 months ago. Marcello Vitali arrived within 8 minutes. The scar above his right eyebrow, earned during a firefight in Naples 12 years earlier, caught the dim light as he stepped into Cassiano's office. His dark eyes swept the room, noting the shattered glass on the floor, the whiskey pooling across the marble, the rigid set of his boss's shoulders. What happened? Cassiano didn't turn from the window. "Prepare the helicopter. Destination: Florence." Marcello waited, He had served Cassiano Moretti for over 2 decades. He knew when to push and when to remain silent. Right now, the tension radiating from Cassiano's frame suggested that pushing would be a mistake. But Marcelo had also been present the night Elisabetta left. He had watched the strongest man he knew crumble in the months that followed. He had listened as Cassiano ordered search after search, only to call them off each time. Because what right did a man have to hunt down the woman he had betrayed? "Is it about her?" Marcelo asked quietly. Cassiano's jaw tightened. "Yes." "Is she in danger?" A long pause. "She was in the hospital." Cassiano's voice was barely above a whisper. "Complications from childbirth. 3 months ago." Marcelo went very still. "Childbirth?" Cassiano finally turned. And Marcelo saw something he had never seen in 23 years of service. Tears. Not falling. Not yet. But gathering in those steel-gray eyes like storm clouds building on the horizon. "I have a son, Marcelo." The words hung in the air between them. Heavy. Impossible. True. "His name is Niccolo," Cassiano continued. "He's 3 months old. And I have never seen his face." Marcelo exhaled slowly. "I'll have the helicopter ready in 15 minutes. He turned toward the door. "Marcelo." The older man paused. "She asked them to call me." Cassiano's voice cracked slightly. "After everything I did, she asked them to call me." Marcelo looked at the man who had once been his closest friend before becoming his boss. The man who had sat in this very office night after night for the past 15 months, staring at his wedding ring like it held answers he would never find. "Then maybe," Marcelo said carefully, "there's still a chance to fix what you broke." "I don't deserve that chance." "No." Marcelo's voice was blunt. "Honest. You don't. But your son deserves a father. And sometimes we earn our redemption through the people who need us, not through the people we hurt." He left without another word. Cassiano stood alone in his office, surrounded by shattered glass and the weight of 15 months of regret. Then he reached for his wedding ring, slipped it back onto his finger, and walked out to meet the son he had never known existed. 15 months earlier, the night Elisabetta left began like any other. Cassiano came home late, as he always did, to the sprawling Moretti estate outside Palermo. The house was quiet. The staff had retired for the evening. The only sound was the distant crash of waves against the cliffs below. He expected to find her in bed, reading perhaps, or already asleep, her dark chestnut hair spread across the pillow like silk. Instead, he found her in the foyer, suitcase beside her, coat already on. Her hazel eyes, usually so warm, so full of life, looked at him with something he had never seen before. Resignation. "Elisabetta." He stopped in the doorway. "What is this?" "This is goodbye, Cassiano." Her voice was calm, steady, the voice of a woman who had made peace with a decision long before speaking it aloud. "Don't be ridiculous." He moved toward her, but she stepped back. "Whatever is bothering you, we can discuss it. Come upstairs. It's late." "I know about Julia." 3 words, and suddenly the air in the foyer felt like ice. Cassiano's expression didn't change. Years of training had taught him to control his features in moments of crisis. But something must have flickered in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or surprise, because Elisabetta nodded slowly. "I've known for 2 months," she said. "The late nights, the phone calls you took in private, the way you looked at her at the Bellini Gala." She paused. "I kept hoping I was wrong, that 8 years of marriage meant something, that you would come to me and tell me the truth. There is nothing." "Don't." Her voice hardened. "Don't lie to me. Not now. Not when I've already decided." Cassiano fell silent. "I read the messages, Cassiano. The ones you thought you deleted." Elisabetta's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her grip on her suitcase. "The things you said to her. The things you wrote about me." "Elisabetta, you called me predictable." Her voice finally cracked. "You told her you felt more alive in one conversation with her than you had in a year with me. You said—" She stopped, took a breath. "You said you wished you had met her first." The words hung between them like knives suspended in midair. Cassiano remembered typing those messages. Late at night, when his marriage had felt like a routine instead of a refuge. When Julia Romano, beautiful, exciting, new, had made him feel things he thought he'd forgotten how to feel. He had never touched her. They had never kissed. But the emotional betrayal was perhaps worse than any physical affair could have been. Because he had given Julia access to the parts of himself that should have belonged only to his wife. "I ended it," he said. 3 weeks ago. I ended it completely. "I know." "Then why?" "Because you only ended it after she started wanting more than you were willing to give." Elisabetta's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Not because you realized what you were doing to our marriage. Not because you chose me. But because she became inconvenient." "That's not." "It is, Cassiano." She picked up her suitcase. "For 8 years, I loved you without fear. I stood beside you through things that would have sent other women running. I built a life in your world. A world I didn't choose. A world I adapted to for you." Her voice dropped. "And you got bored." "I never." "You stopped seeing me." Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "Somewhere along the way I became furniture. Part of the house. Something you expected to be there when you came home, but didn't think about during the day." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I can't do it anymore. I can't keep loving someone who stopped choosing me." Cassiano stepped forward. This time she didn't move back. But when he reached for her, she shook her head. "Let me go, Cassiano." "I can't." "You already did." She looked up at him. This woman he had married at 23, who had given him the best years of her life, who had loved him with a devotion he had taken for granted. "Months ago. You just didn't tell me." "I'll change. No." She moved toward the door. "You won't change because I stayed. You'll only resent me for forgiving you too easily." Her hand touched the handle. "Maybe someday you'll understand what you lost. Maybe then you'll actually change. But I won't stay to find out." She opened the door. The night air rushed in, carrying the scent of salt and rain. "Elisabetta." His voice broke on her name. "Please." She paused, looked back at him one final time. "Goodbye, Cassiano." And then she was gone. Her car pulling away down the long driveway. Her taillights disappearing into the darkness. Leaving him standing in the doorway of a house that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. The tattooed words on his knuckles, "Honori Dolor," stared up at him in the dim light. Honor and pain. He had forgotten about honor. Now all that remained was pain. The months that followed were the darkest of Cassiano's life. He searched for her at first, hired investigators, called in favors, used every resource at his disposal to track down the woman who had vanished from his world. But Elisabetta had planned her departure well. She had withdrawn cash gradually over several months, had established contacts in cities he never thought to check, had created a paper trail that led nowhere and everywhere at once. After 8 weeks he called off the search, not because he couldn't find her, but because Marcelo's words kept echoing in his head. "What will you do if you find her? Drag her back? Force her to stay with a man she doesn't want?" "I just want to talk to her." "You had 8 years to talk to her. You used those years to talk to someone else instead." Cassiano had no answer. So he did the only thing he could do. He threw himself into work, expanded the family's territory, crushed rivals who thought his distraction made him weak, built an empire larger and more powerful than anything his father had imagined. And every night he came home to an empty house, to a bedroom that still smelled faintly of her perfume, to a closet he couldn't bring himself to empty, to a wedding ring he couldn't bring himself to remove. Julia Romano reached out several times in those early months. He never responded. She had been a symptom, not a cause. The cause was his own blindness, his own arrogance, his conviction that Elisabetta would always be there, patient, devoted, waiting. No matter how many times he failed to show her she mattered. He had been wrong, and now he was paying the price. Present day. The helicopter touched down at a private airfield outside Florence just as the sun began to set. Cassiano had changed during the flight, trading his usual black suit for something slightly less intimidating. A charcoal jacket, dark jeans, an open-collar shirt that left the Italian script on his neck visible. But no amount of casual clothing could disguise what he was. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. The hospital staff noticed immediately when he walked through the doors of St. Lucia Children's Medical Center. Nurses straightened. Security guards shifted nervously. A doctor in the hallway took one look at him and quickly found somewhere else to be. Cassiano ignored them all. "Dr. Ferraro," he said to the woman at the reception desk. "Where do I find her?" "Sir, visiting hours are." "Dr. Ferraro. Now." Something in his voice made the receptionist reach for her phone without further protest. 3 minutes later, a woman in her late 30s appeared from a corridor to his left. Dark hair pulled back, professional attire, a calm, measuring gaze that suggested she had dealt with difficult people before and wasn't intimidated by wealthy men in expensive clothing. "Mr. Moretti." She extended her hand. "I'm Dr. Ferraro. Thank you for coming so quickly." He shook her hand briefly. "Where is she?" "Before I take you to Mrs. Moretti." "Santoro." His voice was tight. "She uses her maiden name now." A flicker of understanding crossed Dr. Ferraro's face. "Before I take you to Ms. Santoro," she corrected. "There are some things you should understand. Tell me on the way." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "This way." They walked through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and artificial flowers, past rooms filled with recovering patients, past a children's ward decorated with colorful murals that seemed almost painfully cheerful against the clinical white walls. "Miss Santoro was admitted 3 months ago in active labor," Dr. Ferraro explained as they walked. "The pregnancy had been high risk from the beginning. She developed preeclampsia in her 3rd trimester, which went undiagnosed because she hadn't been receiving regular prenatal care." Cassiano's jaw tightened. "Why not? I can't speak to her personal circumstances, but based on what I observed." Dr. Ferraro paused, chose her words carefully. She seemed to be managing on her own. Limited resources, no family support that I could identify. His wife, the woman who had lived in luxury for 8 years, struggling alone through a high-risk pregnancy because she had chosen to disappear from his life completely. "The delivery was difficult," Dr. Ferraro continued. "Emergency cesarean. There was significant blood loss. She required multiple transfusions." They turned down another corridor. "She recovered initially, but last week she developed a postpartum infection. It required surgery to address. She's stable now but weak." "And the child?" Something in Dr. Ferraro's expression softened. "Nicolo is healthy, strong. He's been staying in the hospital's nursery while his mother recovers." She stopped outside a closed door. "Mr. Moretti, I should tell you something before you go in." Cassiano waited. "Ms. Santoro didn't want to contact you. She was prepared to handle everything on her own. The recovery, the childcare, everything." Dr. Ferraro met his eyes steadily. "But during the surgery last week, there was a moment when we thought we might lose her. When she woke up afterward, she asked me to make the call." "Why?" "Because she realized that if something happened to her, Nicolo would have no one." Dr. Ferraro's voice was gentle but firm. "She's not reaching out because she wants you back in her life, Mr. Moretti. She's reaching out because she's terrified of leaving her son alone in the world." The words hit him like blows, one after another, systematic, brutal. True, she wasn't calling him back because she had forgiven him. She was calling him because she might die, and she needed to know their son would be protected. "I understand," he said quietly. "Do you?" Dr. Ferraro's gaze was sharp. "Because the woman in that room has been through hell, alone, while you've been." She gestured vaguely at his expensive clothes, his obvious wealth. "She doesn't need grand gestures right now. She needs to know that her son has a father who will show up. Consistently, quietly, without drama." Cassiano looked at this doctor. This stranger who had no idea who he was, what he was capable of, how many men had died at his command. And he saw nothing but concern for her patient. "I will show up," he said. Dr. Ferraro studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. Third door on the left. And Mr. Moretti. She paused. Be gentle. She's been through enough. She walked away without looking back. Cassiano stood alone in the corridor, staring at the door that stood between him and the woman he had driven away 15 months earlier. The woman who was raising his son. The woman who had nearly died alone. He took a breath, straightened his shoulders, and walked toward the room. She was smaller than he remembered. That was his first thought as he stepped through the doorway. Elisabetta had always seemed so vibrant to him, so full of life and warmth and quiet strength. But the woman lying in the hospital bed looked fragile, pale. Her dark chestnut hair spread limply across the pillow. Her hazel eyes, closed when he entered, ringed with shadows that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry, and 4 dripped steadily into her arm. Monitors beeped softly in the corner, and in a small bassinet beside her bed, Cassiano stopped breathing. A baby. His baby. Tiny and perfect, wrapped in a pale blue blanket. Dark hair, his hair already thick and slightly wavy. Olive skin. Features too small to read, but somehow achingly familiar. His son. Niccolo. Cassiano's hand rose instinctively, hovering in the air between himself and the bassinet. The Roman lion on his forearm, the beast holding the broken sword, caught the dim light from the window. Don't wake him. Her voice. Hoarse. Weak, but unmistakably her. Cassiano turned to find Elisabetta's eyes open, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. He just fell asleep, she continued. It took an hour. Elisabetta. Her name came out rough, fractured. Sit down. She gestured weakly to a chair near the foot of her bed. Not beside her. Not close. He understood. He sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the steady beeping of the monitors and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the infant between them. You look terrible, she said finally. Despite everything. Cassiano almost laughed. I've been told. You're thinner. I haven't been eating well. Whiskey doesn't count as a food group. I've been informed of that as well. Another silence. This time he broke it. Why didn't you tell me? Elisabetta's eyes moved to the bassinet. To their son. When I found out I was pregnant, I was already in Florence. I'd been here for 2 months. I had a small apartment. A job at a bookstore. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the effort it took. I thought about calling you. Every day for the first 3 weeks. I would pick up my phone and start dialing, and then I would remember. She trailed off. Remember what? The messages. She looked at him then. Really looked. The things you wrote about me to her. Predictable. Boring. More like a sister than a wife. Her jaw tightened. I couldn't call you. I couldn't hear your voice, knowing you thought those things about me. Cassiano felt each word like a blade sliding between his ribs. I didn't mean. You did. Her voice was quiet but firm. In that moment when you wrote those things, you meant them. Maybe you regret them now. Maybe you've spent 15 months convincing yourself you didn't mean them. But you did, Cassiano. And I couldn't bring a child into a marriage where its mother was seen as convenient furniture. He had no defense. She was right. He had written those words, had felt those things, however briefly, had allowed his attention to wander to someone else because his wife's steadiness had started to feel like stagnation. And now he was sitting in a hospital room, looking at the son he had never known existed, facing the woman he had destroyed with his own carelessness. I'm sorry. The words were inadequate. He knew that, but they were all he had. I know, Elisabetta said softly. I know you're sorry, Cassiano. You were probably sorry the moment I walked out the door. You might even have started changing, becoming the husband I deserved. Her eyes glistened. But I couldn't stay to find out. I couldn't keep being the woman who waited for you to choose her. I deserved more than that. You did. I do. He nodded slowly. What happens now? He asked. Elisabetta's gaze moved back to the bassinet, to Niccolo's sleeping form. I don't know, she admitted. When I asked Dr. Ferraro to call you, I was terrified. I thought I was dying. I thought, her voice broke. I thought I would leave him alone in the world, and I couldn't bear it. He won't be alone. No. She looked at him. He won't, because despite everything you did, everything you put me through, I know you would never abandon your son. Never. I believe you. She shifted slightly in the bed, wincing at the movement. But that doesn't mean I want you back in my life, Cassiano. It doesn't mean I trust you. It doesn't mean anything has been forgiven. I understand. Do you? Her eyes searched his face. Because the man I married would have walked in here and made demands, would have called his lawyers, would have tried to take control of everything. Cassiano thought about the phone call he had made during the helicopter ride, to his legal team, telling them to prepare custody documents. He had almost done exactly what she feared. And then he had looked at his wedding ring, and remembered why she had left. I told my lawyers to stand down, he said quietly. Whatever happens next, whatever you decide, I won't force you into anything. I won't use my resources to take him from you. Surprise flickered across her face. Then caution. Why should I believe that? You shouldn't. He met her eyes. I haven't given you any reason to believe anything I say. All I can do is show you, day by day, action by action, that I'm not the man who drove you away. She studied him for a long moment. We'll see. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even trust. But it was a crack in the wall. And for now, that would have to be enough. That evening, Cassiano held his son for the first time. Elisabetta had fallen asleep, exhausted from even their brief conversation, and a nurse had come to check on Niccolo. She had offered to take him to the nursery, but Cassiano had asked if he could hold him instead. The nurse had looked uncertain. Then she had looked at the tears gathering in his steel-gray eyes, and she had placed the baby gently in his arms. Support his head, she murmured. Just like that. Perfect. Then she slipped out of the room, and Cassiano was alone with his son. Niccolo was so small, so impossibly small against his broad chest. The baby's eyes were closed, his tiny lips pursed in sleep. His hand, no bigger than Cassiano's thumb, had somehow found its way to the tattoos on his father's forearm and rested there like a claim. Cassiano looked down at that tiny hand, at the cathedral surrounded by olive branches and black roses, at the symbol of family and loyalty and hope that he had chosen years ago, never knowing how much meaning it would one day hold. I'm your father, he whispered. The words felt strange on his tongue. Father. He had never thought he would be one. Elisabetta had wanted children. He knew that, but he had always found reasons to wait. More territory to secure, more enemies to eliminate, more power to accumulate. And then she had left. And now, I missed everything, he continued softly. Your first heartbeat, your first ultrasound, your first kick. His voice cracked. I missed it all because I was too blind to see what I had. Niccolo stirred slightly. His eyes opened, and Cassiano found himself staring into steel-gray irises that were exactly like his own. Hello, little one. The baby blinked up at him, curious, unafraid, as if meeting his father for the first time was simply another interesting experience in a world full of interesting experiences. I'm going to make you a promise, Cassiano murmured. I'm going to be here, every day, every night. However your mother decides we move forward, I will be here. I will not abandon you. Niccolo's tiny hand tightened around his finger, and something cracked open in Cassiano's chest. Something that had been sealed shut for 15 months. Something that felt dangerously like hope. 3 days passed. Cassiano stayed in Florence, taking a suite at a hotel 10 minutes from the hospital. He visited every day, twice a day when Elisabetta would allow it, and spent hours in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, watching their son sleep, learning the rhythm of feedings and diaper changes, becoming familiar with the 1,000 small tasks that kept an infant alive and content. Elisabetta watched him with wary eyes, but she didn't send him away. On the 4th day, something changed. Cassiano arrived for his morning visit to find Elisabetta sitting up in bed, her color better, her eyes more alert. "You're improving," he said. "Dr. Ferraro says I might be discharged by the end of the week. That's good news. Is it?" She looked at him steadily. "Because I have nowhere to go, Cassiano. The apartment I was renting, I couldn't keep up with the payments while I was in the hospital. My things are in storage. My job is gone." He had suspected as much, but hearing her say it aloud made his chest ache. "Come back to Sicily," he said. "No, not to the estate. I have properties in Taormina. Smaller places. Quiet. You could stay there while you recover. I would keep my distance." "Why would you do that?" "Because you need somewhere safe to heal. Because our son needs stability." He paused. "And because I owe you far more than an apartment and some space." She studied him for a long moment. "I don't want to be dependent on you. I know. I don't want to owe you anything. You won't. Consider it restitution. For the years of stress my life caused you." Something flickered in her eyes, almost like amusement. The great Cassiano Moretti, offering restitution? "The great Cassiano Moretti," he said quietly, realizing that his wife, he caught himself, that the mother of his child deserves far more than he ever gave her. The almost amusement faded, replaced by something more complex. "I'll think about it," she said finally. It was more than he had dared to hope for. That afternoon, Cassiano received a phone call that changed everything. He was in the hospital's small cafeteria, forcing himself to eat something that wasn't whiskey, when Marcello's name appeared on his screen. "What is it?" "We have a problem." Marcello's voice was tight. "Sergio Bellaforte knows you're in Florence." Cassiano's blood turned cold. Sergio Bellaforte, the head of the Bellaforte family in Naples. A rival Cassiano had been managing carefully for years. A patient, calculating predator who had been waiting for any sign of weakness. "How?" "I don't know. Someone talked. Someone saw you at the hospital. It doesn't matter how." Marcello paused. "He knows about the woman, and he knows about the child." The world narrowed to a single point of focus. "What has he done?" "Nothing yet. But my sources say he's mobilizing. Sending men north." Another pause. "He sees this as an opportunity, Cassiano. Your attention divided. Your emotions compromised. Your priorities elsewhere." Cassiano stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor with a sound like a gunshot. "How long until his men reach Florence?" 6 hours. Maybe 8. "I want the Taormina property secured. Quietly. No one in or out without my authorization." "And the hospital?" Cassiano's jaw tightened. "Double the security. No one enters or exits her room without verification. If anyone even looks at them wrong, I want to know about it." "Understood." Marcello hesitated. "And you?" Cassiano looked toward the elevator, toward the room where his son was sleeping, toward the woman he had sworn to protect 15 months too late. "I'll handle Bellaforte myself." He didn't tell Elisabetta about the threat. Not immediately. He knew he should. Knew she deserved to understand the danger. But when he walked back into her room and saw her holding Niccolò against her chest, humming softly, her hazel eyes filled with the kind of peace he hadn't seen since before their marriage fell apart, he couldn't bring himself to shatter it. Not yet. Instead, he sat in his usual chair, watched them together, and planned. Sergio Bellaforte wanted to use his family as leverage. Wanted to force Cassiano into a position of vulnerability. Wanted to prove that even the great Moretti could be brought low through his attachments. But Bellaforte didn't understand. The man who had let his wife walk away, the man who had taken his marriage for granted, that man might have been vulnerable. The man sitting in this hospital room, watching his son sleep, knowing exactly what he stood to lose, that man was not vulnerable. That man was dangerous. The attack came sooner than expected. It happened at dusk, while Elisabetta was sleeping and Niccolò was in Cassiano's arms. A soft knock on the door. A nurse's uniform. But the eyes were wrong. Cassiano saw it instantly. The cold calculation. The slight bulge under the left arm where a weapon was concealed. The way the nurse positioned herself between him and the door. "Mr. Moretti." She smiled. "Mr. Bellaforte sends his regards." Cassiano didn't move. Niccolo was still in his arms. His son. His 3-month-old son. "Whatever Bellaforte has promised you," Cassiano said calmly, "I'll triple it." The woman's smile widened. "He said you'd say that." Her hand moved toward her concealed weapon. "He also said to remind you that some debts can't be paid in money." Behind her, the door burst open. Marcello, 2 of Cassiano's most trusted men. The nurse spun, weapon clearing its holster, but she was too slow. Marcello's arm wrapped around her throat. One of the other men relieved her of her gun. And through it all, Cassiano remained absolutely still, protecting his son with his body, shielding him from the violence that had followed his father his entire life. "Take her," Cassiano said quietly. "Find out everything she knows." The woman was dragged from the room. Marcello lingered in the doorway. "There will be more. I know. The hospital isn't safe. I know. What do you want to do?" Cassiano looked down at Niccolo, who had slept through the entire confrontation, completely unaware of how close danger had come. Then he looked at Elisabetta, who was stirring now, confusion in her drowsy eyes. "Cassiano?" Her voice was thick with sleep. "What's happening?" He made his decision. "We need to leave," he said. "Tonight. All of us." "Leave? I don't." She tried to sit up. "What's going on?" "There are men coming." He held her gaze steadily. "Enemies of mine. They know about Niccolo. They know about you." Fear flickered across her face. Then something else. Something harder. "This is because of who you are," she said. "Because of what you do." "Yes. I left to escape this world." "I know. And now it's following me anyway." "Yes." He moved closer to her bed, still holding their son. "Elisabetta, I know you have every reason to hate me, every reason to want me gone. But right now, in this moment, the only thing that matters is keeping you and Niccolo safe." She stared at him, at the man who had destroyed their marriage, at the father of her child, at the Mafia boss whose enemies were now threatening her son. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "it doesn't mean I've forgiven you. I know. It doesn't mean I trust you. I know. It doesn't mean anything except that I'm choosing safety for my son. I understand." He held out his free hand. "But I need you to decide now, before more of them arrive." Elisabetta looked at his hand, at the tattoos across his knuckles. Honor y dolor. Honor and pain. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she placed her hand in his, and together, they prepared to face whatever was coming. The drive to the airfield took 45 minutes. Cassiano sat in the back of the armored SUV with Elisabetta and Niccolo, his eyes scanning every shadow, every approaching vehicle, every face that appeared in the darkness beyond the tinted windows. Elisabetta held their son against her chest, her arms wrapped around him like a shield. She hadn't spoken since they left the hospital. But her hand was still touching his. Not holding, not quite, but there. A bridge across 15 months of silence. Cassiano wanted to say something, wanted to tell her that everything would be all right, that he would protect them, that Sergio Bellaforte and anyone else who threatened his family would regret the day they were born. But he knew those words would ring hollow. He had made promises before, had broken them, had driven her away with his carelessness. Actions, Marcello had said, not words. So Cassiano stayed silent. And when the helicopter lifted off, rising above the lights of Florence and banking south toward Sicily, he kept his hand exactly where it was, touching hers, a promise he was only beginning to learn how to keep. The Taormina property was smaller than the main estate, but no less secure. Perched on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean, it was a villa of white stone and red tiles, surrounded by ancient olive trees and guarded by men who had been loyal to the Moretti family for generations. Cassiano had purchased it years ago as a retreat. He had never used it. Now, as the helicopter touched down on the private landing pad and he guided Elisabetta toward the house, He was grateful for its existence. "You'll have the master suite," he said. "There's a nursery adjacent that we can set up for Nicolo. The staff has already prepared everything." "Where will you be?" "Guest quarters. On the other side of the house." She paused, looked at him. "You're not staying close?" "I told you I would keep my distance." "I meant it." Something shifted in her expression. Something that almost looked like disappointment? No. He was imagining things. "The kitchen is fully stocked," he continued. "There's a doctor on call if you need anything. And security is Cassiano." He stopped. "Thank you." 2 words. Simple. Quiet. But from her lips, from the woman who had every reason to hate him, they felt like absolution. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I do." She adjusted Nicolo in her arms. "For not fighting me in that hospital room. For not demanding custody. For listening when I said I didn't trust you. You were right not to trust me. I know." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "But you're making it harder to stay angry at you. I'll try to remedy that." The smile flickered, almost became real, then faded. "Good night, Cassiano." "Good night, Elisabetta." She turned and walked into the house. Nicolo's small hand waved briefly over her shoulder, a gesture that was almost certainly accidental but felt impossibly deliberate. Cassiano watched until the door closed behind them. Then he turned to Marcello, who had been waiting at a respectful distance. "Tell me everything you learned from the woman at the hospital." Marcello's expression darkened. "Bellaforte is planning something bigger than an intimidation run. The woman, her name is Vera Lucchini, was hired specifically to identify the child. To confirm his existence." He paused. "She wasn't supposed to kill anyone. Just observe." "Then why the weapon?" "Insurance. In case things went wrong." "What else?" "Bellaforte has been tracking you for weeks. Someone inside your organization is feeding him information." Marcello's jaw tightened. "He knew about Florence before you arrived. He knew about the hospital. He knew about Elisabetta," Cassiano finished. "Yes." Cassiano's eyes moved to the windows of the master suite, where a light had just turned on. Someone inside his organization. Someone who had betrayed him. Someone who had put his family at risk. "Find them," he said quietly. "And when I do?" Cassiano's hand curled into a fist. The words on his knuckles, "Honori Dolor," caught the moonlight. "Bring them to me." The days that followed established a new rhythm. Cassiano kept his word about maintaining distance. He saw Elisabetta and Nicolo at meals, which he shared with them at the large dining table, sitting at the opposite end, never pushing for more closeness than she was willing to give. He spent mornings handling business by phone and video, coordinating the search for Bellaforte's informant, managing the empire that demanded his attention even when his heart was elsewhere. He spent afternoons in the garden, visible from the windows but never approaching uninvited, available if Elisabetta wanted him nearby but never forcing his presence. And he spent evenings alone, watching the sunset from the terrace, thinking about everything he had lost, everything he was trying to rebuild. On the 5th day, something changed. Cassiano was in the garden, reading a report from Marcello, when he heard footsteps on the gravel path behind him. He turned. Elisabetta stood a few feet away, Nicolo cradled in her arms, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "May I join you?" The question surprised him. "Of course." She sat on the bench beside him. Not close, but closer than she had been since the night she left. Nicolo was awake, his gray eyes watching the olive branches sway overhead, making small sounds of contentment. "He likes it here," Elisabetta said. "Does he?" "He sleeps better, cries less." She paused. "I sleep better too." "Good." Silence fell between them, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Less hostile, more tentative. "I've been thinking," Elisabetta said eventually. Cassiano waited. "About what you said. About showing me through actions." She looked at him. "You've been doing that. Keeping your distance when I know it's killing you. Being here without pushing. Giving me space to hate you while also, she trailed off. While also being a good father. The words hit him square in the chest. I've been watching you with him, she continued. When you think I'm not looking. The way you hold him. The way you talk to him. Her voice softened. You're not the same man who sat in that office 15 months ago, ignoring me while you texted another woman. I was never texting her while you were. I know, she cut him off. But it felt like it. Every time you were distant. Every time you seemed bored. Every time you made me feel like I was interrupting your real life just by existing. She looked down at Nicolo. But you don't look bored now. You look terrified, he admitted. Overwhelmed. Completely out of my depth. A small laugh escaped her. Genuine. The first real laugh he had heard from her since. He couldn't remember. That's how parenthood feels, she said. Or so I've been told. How do you manage? One moment at a time. She shifted Nicolo in her arms. I've had 3 months of practice. You're just getting started. I have a lot to catch up on. You do. She met his eyes. But you're trying. That counts for something. Cassiano felt something loosen in his chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. That evening Marcello brought news. We found the traitor. Cassiano was in his temporary office, a converted study on the ground floor, when his right-hand man delivered the words he had been waiting to hear. Who? Franco Barisi. Cassiano's expression didn't change. But inside, something went cold. Franco Barisi had worked for the family for 18 years. Had been personally recruited by Cassiano's father. Had sat at the table during dozens of strategic meetings. Had access to the inner workings of the organization. Had been trusted completely. You're certain? His bank accounts show payments from a shell company connected to the Bellaforte family. Marcello's voice was tight with controlled fury. He's been feeding them information for at least 6 months. Maybe longer. Does he know we're onto him? Not yet. He's been told you're traveling. He doesn't know where. Cassiano stood. Walked to the window. Stared out at the darkness beyond. Bring him here. Here? To the villa? Yes. Cassiano's hand curled around the window frame. Bellaforte wanted to threaten my family. Franco helped him. His voice dropped to something cold. Deadly. I want Franco to understand exactly what that decision cost him. And I want Bellaforte to hear about what happened. In detail. Marcello nodded slowly. It will be done. He turned to leave. Marcello. The older man paused. Not in the house. And not where she might see. There's an old wine cellar beneath the property. Use that. Understood. Cassiano returned his gaze to the darkness. Somewhere out there, Sergio Bellaforte was waiting. Planning. Believing he had found the leverage he needed to bring down the Moretti family. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Franco Barisi arrived at the villa 2 days later. He came willingly, believing he had been summoned for a routine meeting, and didn't realize his mistake until the door to the wine cellar closed behind him. By then, it was too late. Cassiano was waiting in the dim, cool space, surrounded by rows of aging bottles that would have been worth millions. The Roman lion on his forearm seemed to ripple as he moved. The Italian script on his neck, Ogni Celta ha un prezzo, was clearly visible above his collar. Franco! Cassiano's voice echoed off the stone walls. Sit! Franco's face had gone pale, but he sat. 18 years, Cassiano continued. My father recruited you personally. You sat at our table. You knew our secrets. He moved closer. And you sold us to Bellaforte. I can explain. No. Cassiano's voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. You can't. Because there is no explanation that justifies what you did. It was business. Nothing personal. Bellaforte offered. He offered to let you live if you helped him get to my family. Cassiano stopped directly in front of the trembling man. You gave him information about my wife. My son. A 3-month-old child, Franco. Franco's mouth opened. Closed. No words came out. You see, Cassiano said softly. 6 months ago, you might have been right. Business is business. I might have been angry, but I would have handled it cleanly, efficiently. He leaned down until his face was inches from Franco's. But now I have a son Bellaforte threatened. A son you helped him find. Franco started to shake. Please. I won't kill you. Relief flickered across the trader's face. Too soon. But by the time we're finished here, you'll wish I had. Cassiano straightened. You're going to tell me everything. Every piece of information you gave Bellaforte. Every plan you know about. Every name connected to this betrayal. And if I do? Then you'll spend the rest of your life somewhere far away, with no money, no identity, and no hope of ever returning to Italy. Cassiano's gray eyes turned to ice. If you refuse, Marcello will make the next few hours very unpleasant for you. Franco looked at Marcello, who stood by the door with an expression that promised exactly what his boss had described. Then he looked back at Cassiano. I'll tell you everything. Smart choice. The interrogation lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, Cassiano had everything he needed. Bellaforte's timeline, his resources, the location of his main base of operations, the names of other informants within various organizations across Italy, and most importantly, his plan. Bellaforte wasn't just targeting Cassiano. He was building a coalition, 6 smaller families, all frustrated with Moretti dominance, all willing to align with anyone who could bring the empire down. The kidnapping of Niccolo, or the threat of it, was supposed to be the first move, a demonstration of capability, proof that even the great Cassiano Moretti could be reached. It would have been followed by coordinated strikes against Moretti assets, assassinations of key personnel, a systematic dismantling of everything Cassiano had built, all because he had gotten distracted by his estranged wife and unknown child. Bellaforte had miscalculated badly. Cassiano had been distracted, but not weakened. If anything, he was more dangerous now than he had ever been, because now he had something worth protecting. What happens next? Elisabetta asked the question the following morning, during breakfast. Cassiano had just finished explaining, in carefully edited terms, what he had learned from Franco. She sat across from him at the dining table, Niccolo in a carrier beside her, her hazel eyes sharp with concern. I handle Bellaforte. How? That's not something you need to worry about. Cassiano. Her voice hardened. If this affects my son, I need to know. He set down his coffee cup, looked at her. For a moment, he considered maintaining the walls between his world and hers, protecting her from the ugliness that funded their safety, their comfort, their very existence. But she had asked, and he was done lying to her. Bellaforte has assembled a coalition against my family, he said. 6 smaller organizations. His plan was to use the threat against Niccolo as leverage, as proof that I could be weakened through my attachments. And I'm going to dismantle that coalition, one family at a time. His voice was calm, measured. Some will surrender when they realize Bellaforte's plan has been exposed. Others will need more persuasion. Persuasion, she repeated flatly. Yes, you're going to war. I'm protecting what's mine. He held her gaze. I know this isn't the life you wanted. I know you left specifically to escape it. But right now, at this moment, the only way to keep you and Niccolo safe is to eliminate the threat completely. Elisabetta was silent for a long moment. Then, how long? Weeks, probably. Maybe longer. Will you be in danger? Perhaps. And if something happens to you? Her voice tightened. If you go off to fight your war and you don't come back? Cassiano reached into his jacket pocket, withdrew a thick envelope, placed it on the table between them. Everything you would need, he said quietly. Documents, accounts, properties in other countries where the Moretti name holds no weight. If anything happens to me, you and Niccolo will be provided for. Forever. No strings attached. She stared at the envelope. You've been planning this? Since the moment I learned I had a son. He pushed the envelope toward her. I have many sins to answer for, Elisabetta. But leaving you and Nicolo unprotected will not be one of them. She didn't touch the envelope, but something in her expression shifted, softened. Come back, she said quietly. I intend to. I mean it, Cassiano. She leaned forward slightly. Don't you dare let yourself get killed when I'm just starting to believe you might actually change. Despite everything, despite the danger ahead and the weight of his decisions, Cassiano smiled. I'll do my best. The campaign against the coalition took 3 weeks. Cassiano systematically visited each of the 6 families that had aligned with Bellaforte. Some conversations were civil, others were not. By the time he was finished, 4 of the 6 had withdrawn from the coalition entirely, publicly denouncing Bellaforte and reaffirming their loyalty to the balance of power that the Moretti family maintained. 1 had been removed from consideration, and the 6th had been absorbed completely, its remaining assets distributed among families who had remained loyal. Bellaforte watched his coalition crumble from his stronghold in Naples, and waited. He knew Cassiano was coming, knew there was no escape, knew that the moment would arrive when he would face the man whose family he had threatened. It arrived on a Thursday evening. The Bellaforte estate was an ancient fortress on the outskirts of Naples. Stone walls, armed guards, security systems that would have made any government envious. Cassiano walked through the front gate alone. No weapons visible, no army at his back, just a man in a black suit, with tattoos crawling up his forearms and a wedding ring glinting on his left hand. The guards let him pass. They had been informed. Sergio Bellaforte was waiting in his private study. He was alone. An acknowledgement, perhaps, that this was a conversation between equals, or what passed for equals in their world. Moretti. Bellaforte didn't rise from his chair. You've been busy. You made it necessary. I made it interesting. The older man smiled. Cold green eyes glinted in the lamplight. For years you've been untouchable, too powerful, too protected. I thought perhaps finding a weakness would change the game. My family is not a weakness. No? Bellaforte's eyebrows rose. Then why did you come here alone? Why not send an army? Why risk yourself in my territory? Cassiano stepped closer. Close enough to see the slight tremor in Bellaforte's hands. The recognition in his eyes that he had badly miscalculated. Because this isn't about armies, Cassiano said quietly. This is about you, threatening my son. My 3-month-old son, who had done nothing to you, who didn't even know you existed. Business is not an excuse. Cassiano's voice dropped to something dangerous. I've done many things I'm not proud of, Sergio. Made decisions that keep me awake at night. But I have never targeted a child. I wasn't going to hurt him, just use him as leverage. Cassiano's lip curled. A bargaining chip, a tool to manipulate me. He shook his head slowly. That's the problem with men like you. You've spent so long thinking of people as pieces on a board that you've forgotten they're human. Bellaforte's jaw tightened. What do you want, Moretti? Your retirement. A pause. Excuse me? You're done. Cassiano's voice was final. The coalition is destroyed. Your allies have abandoned you. Your organization is weakened beyond recovery. He leaned forward. You have 2 options. 1. You publicly announce your retirement, transfer your remaining assets to neutral parties, and disappear to whatever comfortable exile you choose. 2. I dismantle what's left of your family the hard way, and the only thing people remember about you is how thoroughly you failed. Bellaforte stared at him. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then, you're different. Cassiano tilted his head. What? Different from before? Bellaforte's eyes narrowed, studying him. I've watched you for years. Cold, efficient, ruthless. But now, he gestured vaguely. There's something else. Something I didn't expect. Fatherhood changes a man. Does it? Bellaforte's smile turned bitter. I had children. 3 of them. They all hate me now. Then perhaps you made the same mistake I did. Cassiano straightened. You took them for granted. Assumed they would always be there. Forgot to show them they mattered. The words hung in the air. Bellafort's expression flickered with something that might have been regret. Option 1, he said finally. I'll take option 1. Cassiano nodded. Smart choice. He turned to leave. Moretti. Cassiano paused. The woman. Your wife. Bellafort's voice was quieter now. Is she worth it? All of this, the war, the risk, the changes in you, is she worth it? Cassiano thought about Elisabetta, about her strength, her resilience, her refusal to stay with a man who had stopped choosing her, about the way she held their son, about the tiny, hesitant cracks appearing in the wall between them. Yes, he said simply. She's worth everything. He walked out without looking back. When Cassiano returned to the villa 3 days later, he found Elisabetta waiting for him in the garden. She was alone. Niccolo was with the nanny, a kind older woman they had hired in the weeks since arriving in Taormina. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Elisabetta stood among the olive trees with her arms crossed and an unreadable expression on her face. It's done? She asked as he approached. Yes, all of it. The coalition is broken. Bellaforte has agreed to retire. The threat is neutralized. She nodded slowly. I watched the news. There were reports of incidents in Naples and elsewhere. There were. People died. Yes. He didn't elaborate. She didn't ask. For a moment, they simply stood there, facing each other in the fading light. Then Elisabetta spoke. When I left you, she said, I swore I would never go back to that world. The violence, the secrets, the constant fear that someone might come for you, or for me. Cassiano said nothing. And now I'm deeper in it than ever. She laughed softly, a sound without much humor. I have armed guards watching my son's nursery. I've seen reports about bodies being found in warehouses. I know that somewhere out there, people are afraid of my... She stopped, corrected herself. Of Niccolo's father. I'm sorry. Are you? She looked at him. Really looked. Because from where I'm standing, this is who you've always been. The Mafia boss. The strategist. The man who solves problems through whatever methods necessary. I am that man, he admitted. I won't pretend otherwise. Then how is this different? How is any of this different from before? Cassiano took a step closer. Before, he said quietly, I did these things for the family, for power, for legacy. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Now I do them for you, for Niccolo, to protect the only thing that matters. And what about me? Her voice cracked slightly. What about what I want? I didn't ask for this protection. I didn't ask to be dragged back into. I know. He tightened his grip on her hand. And if you want to leave, if you want to take Niccolo and disappear again, I won't stop you. The resources I gave you are real. The accounts are yours. You could go anywhere in the world and never see me again. Her eyes widened. You'd let me go? I'd let you choose. He stepped even closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. Because that's what I didn't give you before. A choice. You stayed with me for 8 years because you loved me, and I treated that love like a certainty instead of a gift. Tears gathered in her eyes. Cassiano, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to love me again. I'm just asking. He paused, drew a breath. I'm asking for the chance to show you who I can be. Not the man who wrote those messages. Not the man who got bored with his own wife. But a father, partner, a man who wakes up every day trying to deserve the family he almost lost. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't pull her hand away. I'm scared, she whispered. Of what? Of trusting you again. Her voice broke. Of letting you back in. Of believing that things are different, only to have you hurt me all over again. I know. He lifted his free hand, gently wiping the tear from her cheek. But fear isn't the same as certainty. Fear means there's still something to lose, still something to hope for. She closed her eyes. He waited. The moment stretched. And then, okay, The word was barely audible, but it was enough. Okay? He repeated. I'm not forgiving you. Not yet. But… She opened her eyes, met his gaze. I'm willing to let you try. To show me. One day at a time. Cassiano felt something shift inside him. Something that had been locked away for 15 months. Something that felt like hope. One day at a time, he agreed. And for the first time since Elisabetta walked out of his life, he believed that maybe they might find their way back to each other. 2 months later, the villa had begun to feel like home. Nicolo was 5 months old now. Growing quickly, his gray eyes bright with curiosity. His small hands constantly reaching for everything in sight. He had started making sounds that were almost words, babbling endlessly whenever Cassiano held him. Elisabetta watched these moments with soft eyes. The wall between her and Cassiano had not crumbled, but it had developed more cracks, more openings. She smiled at him now, occasionally laughed at his dry observations, accepted his presence at meals and in the garden and during the evening hours when Nicolo demanded attention from both parents simultaneously. They had not discussed the future, had not defined what they were to each other. But there was something growing between them, something fragile and new, something worth protecting. One evening, as they sat on the terrace watching the sun set over the Mediterranean, Elisabetta broke a comfortable silence. I have a confession to make. Cassiano turned to her. What kind of confession? When I was in the hospital, before I asked Dr. Ferraro to call you, I almost called someone else. He waited. I almost called your mother. Surprise flickered across his face. Luciana. Yes. Elisabetta looked down at her hands. She was always kind to me, kinder than you sometimes. She would check on me when you were away, send me flowers on my birthday, remind me that I was part of the family. She adored you. I know. A small smile touched her lips. When I left, I almost called her to say goodbye, but I knew she would tell you where I was. So I didn't. Why are you telling me this now? Elisabetta was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because I called her last week. Cassiano went still. You spoke to my mother? Yes. She finally met his eyes. I thought, with everything that's happened, she deserved to know about Nicolo, her grandson. For a moment Cassiano didn't speak. Couldn't speak. His relationship with Luciana was complicated. She had been the one to point out how badly he was handling his marriage, had warned him about the path he was walking, had looked at him with disappointment when Elisabetta left, and he had avoided her calls for months afterward. What did she say? He asked finally. She cried. Elisabetta's voice softened. For 20 minutes. Then she started asking questions. About Nicolo. About me. About… She hesitated. About you. What did you tell her? The truth. That you're here. That you're trying. That I don't know what the future holds. But you're showing up every day. Cassiano felt a lump form in his throat. She wants to visit, Elisabetta continued. If that's all right with you. Yes. The word came out rough. Yes, of course. I thought you might say that. She reached out, her hand covering his where it rested on the arm of his chair. She also told me something. About the day I left. What? She said you came to her house that night. After I drove away. You sat in her kitchen and cried for 3 hours. Cassiano closed his eyes. He remembered that night. The worst night of his life. She said it was the first time she'd seen you cry since your father's funeral. It was. She said you kept asking what you could have done differently. How you could have been better. Elisabetta's grip tightened. She said you already knew, even then, that you'd destroyed something irreplaceable. I did. And you've spent 15 months trying to figure out how to live with that. He opened his eyes, looked at her. Yes. Elisabetta studied his face for a long moment. Then she did something she hadn't done since the night she left. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was brief, gentle, barely a brush of lips against lips. But it was everything. I'm not ready to forgive you completely, she whispered. But I'm starting to. Cassiano lifted his hand to her face, cupped her cheek. Take all the time you need. I will. She smiled, a real smile, reaching her eyes. But Cassiano? Yes. Don't make me regret giving you this chance. Never. He pressed his forehead against hers. Never again. Luciana Moretti arrived at the villa 3 days later. She was 68 years old, silver-haired and elegant, dressed in her customary black with pearls at her throat. But the moment she saw Niccolo, all traces of composure vanished. Mio Dio, she breathed. Mio nipotino. She gathered the baby in her arms with the practiced ease of a woman who had raised children of her own. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at her grandson. This unexpected gift she had never known existed. He has your eyes, she said to Cassiano, and your father's nose. God help him. Luciana laughed through her tears. And your sense of humor. She turned to Elisabetta, who stood nearby watching the reunion with a gentle smile. Thank you for calling me, for letting me know. You deserve to know, Elisabetta said simply. You're his grandmother. Nah. Luciana tested the word. I never thought I would hear that word. After everything. She glanced at Cassiano. After everything my son did to drive you away. Mother. Don't. Luciana's voice sharpened slightly. I spent 15 months watching you punish yourself. Watching you wander through that empty house like a ghost. I told you then what you'd lost, and I'm telling you now. She turned to face him fully. You have been given a second chance that most men never receive. If you waste it, I won't. See that you don't. Her gaze softened. Now, I want to hear everything about my grandson. Every detail. And then, she looked at Elisabetta. I want to hear about you. What you've been through. How you survived. That might take a while. I have time. Luciana settled into a chair, Niccolo still in her arms. I have nothing but time. And for the first time in 15 months, the villa felt not just like a refuge, but like a home. The weeks that followed were the happiest Cassiano had known in years. Luciana stayed at the villa, doting on Niccolo, rebuilding her relationship with Elisabetta, occasionally fixing her son with looks that reminded him exactly how much he still had to prove. Cassiano continued to balance his responsibilities with his new priority. Being present. He was there for every feeding, every bath, every late-night crying session when Niccolo refused to sleep. He learned the particular pitch of his son's hungry cry versus his tired cry versus his I just want to be held cry. He learned which songs calmed him down, which positions put him to sleep, which toys made him laugh. And through it all, Elisabetta watched, measured, slowly allowed herself to trust. They shared more kisses, held hands during evening walks, had long conversations about everything and nothing, the kind of conversations they hadn't had since the early years of their marriage. One night, as they lay on a blanket in the garden, watching stars appear above the Mediterranean, Elisabetta asked a question she'd been avoiding. Do you regret it? Regret what? Not the affair. I know you regret that. She turned her head to look at him. But the rest of it, the life you chose, the power, the violence, all the things that make you who you are. Cassiano considered the question carefully. I regret that it hurt you, he said finally. I regret that it put our son in danger. I regret that I sometimes confused strength with cruelty, necessity with ambition. But if I hadn't built this life, I wouldn't have been able to protect you when Bellaforte came. I wouldn't have the resources to keep you safe, to give Niccolo everything he'll ever need. So the ends justify the means? No. He turned to face her. The ends don't justify anything, but I can't change who I am. I can only try to be better at it. Use my power to protect instead of dominate, to build instead of destroy. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I think I'm starting to believe you. Only starting? Give it time. A smile tugged at her lips. I'm a slow learner. He pulled her closer. I have time. Do you? For you. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. I have forever. 3 months later, on a warm autumn evening, Cassiano asked Elisabetta to marry him again. Not with a proposal, not with a ring, but with a question. If I could do it over, he said, would you give me the chance to get it right? They were standing on the terrace, Niccolò asleep in his nursery, the Mediterranean shimmering under a full moon. Elisabetta looked at him for a long time, at the man who had broken her heart, who had driven her away, who had spent the past 6 months proving, day by day, action by action, that he could be different. Yes, she said softly. Yes. On one condition. He waited. No more secrets. Her eyes held his. No more walls. If we're going to do this, really do this, I need to know that you'll let me in. All the way in. Even the parts you think are too dark for me to handle. That's a big ask. I know. She lifted her chin. But I'm worth it. Despite everything. Despite the weight of the moment, the gravity of what she was demanding. Cassiano laughed. Yes, he agreed. You are. He reached into his pocket. Withdrew the wedding ring she had left on his desk 15 months earlier. The ring he had kept with him every day since. This belongs to you, he said. Elisabetta looked at the ring, then at him, and slowly, deliberately, she extended her left hand. Cassiano slipped the ring onto her finger, where it belonged. The renewal ceremony took place 6 weeks later. It was small, intimate, just family and close friends gathered in the villa's garden, surrounded by olive trees and Mediterranean light. Niccolò, now 8 months old, sat in Luciana's lap, babbling happily through the entire service. Marcello stood at Cassiano's side, his scarred face softened by something that might have been emotion. And Elisabetta stood before him in a simple white dress, her dark chestnut hair loose around her shoulders, her hazel eyes shining with tears she no longer tried to hide. I take you, Cassiano said, his voice rough with feeling, as my partner, my equal, the center of everything I am and everything I hope to become. I take you, Elisabetta replied, as my husband, not the man who failed me, but the man who learned from his failures, the father of my son, the person I choose every day to trust. They exchanged rings. Not the original wedding bands, those carried too much history, too much pain. New rings, simple gold, inscribed with words that meant something to both of them. Ogni giorno una scelta, every day a choice. That evening, after the guests had departed and Niccolò had been put to bed, Cassiano and Elisabetta stood on the terrace where their journey had truly begun. Are you happy? He asked. She considered the question. I'm getting there, she said. Happiness isn't a destination for me anymore. It's something I choose to build, day by day. Like trust. Like trust. She leaned into him. Like forgiveness. Like love. He wrapped his arms around her, held her close, felt the steady beat of her heart against his chest. I will spend the rest of my life earning this, he murmured. I know. She tilted her face up to look at him. That's why I said yes. He kissed her then, not gently, not hesitantly, but with all the passion and grief and hope and fear that had built up over 15 months of separation and 6 months of slow, careful reconciliation. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she laughed softly. What? He asked. Nothing. She shook her head. I'm just grateful. For what? For that phone call. Her eyes met his. The one that brought you back to me. Cassiano thought about that moment. The shattered glass. The cold shock of the doctor's voice. The 3 words that had changed everything. You have a son. I'm grateful too, he said. And as they stood together on the terrace, the Mediterranean stretching endlessly before them and their son sleeping peacefully inside, Cassiano Moretti, one of the most feared men in Italy, finally understood what real power was. Not the empire he had built, not the enemies he had crushed, not the wealth or the influence or the fear he commanded. Real power was this: a woman who had every reason to leave him but chose to stay. A son who would grow up knowing his father. A family rebuilt from the ashes of his own mistakes. Every choice has a price. He had paid his price. And the reward was everything. 1 year later, The Moretti estate outside Palermo had been transformed. The cold, formal rooms that Elisabetta had once fled now rang with laughter. Toys scattered across expensive carpets. Crayon drawings taped to ancient walls. The sound of a toddler's running feet echoing through hallways that had known only silence for 15 months. Niccolò was 20 months old now. A whirlwind of energy and curiosity, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's warm smile. He had learned to walk, then to run, then to climb anything he could reach. Cassiano spent hours chasing him through the garden, teaching him to throw a ball, reading to him before bed picture books now, but eventually the classics that line the study walls. Being present, every day, without fail. Elisabetta ran the household with quiet authority, transforming the estate from a mausoleum into a home. She had also started a small foundation, using Moretti resources to support women and children escaping dangerous situations. Luciana visited often, doting on her grandson and occasionally taking Elisabetta's side during playful disagreements with Cassiano. And Cassiano himself, he was still one of the most feared men in Italy, still ran his empire with precision and intelligence, still made hard decisions when necessary. But something fundamental had shifted. His priorities had realigned. His heart had expanded. He had learned, through failure and loss and the long, painful work of redemption, what really mattered. On the anniversary of the phone call that had changed everything, Cassiano sat in his office overlooking the Sicilian coastline. The same office where he had learned he was a father. The same chair where he had shattered that glass of whiskey. The same desk where his wedding ring had rested, alone and waiting, for all those empty months. Now, a framed photograph sat beside his computer. Elisabetta, Niccolò, and himself, taken at the villa in Taormina. Family. His family. There was a knock at the door. "Come in." Elisabetta entered, carrying a cup of espresso. "You missed dinner," she said, setting the cup on his desk. "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be present." She leaned against the desk beside him. "What are you working on?" "Remembering." "Remembering what?" He looked up at her, at this woman who had given him everything, lost him, found him again, and chose every day to stay. "The phone call," he said. 2 years ago today." Her expression softened. "Has it really been 2 years?" "It has." She was quiet for a moment. Then she moved closer, sliding onto his lap with the ease of long familiarity. "Do you remember what you said to me? That first day at the hospital?" "I said a lot of things. You said you would show me, day by day, action by action, that you weren't the man who drove me away." "I remember." "And," he met her eyes, "have I shown you?" She studied his face for a long moment, the lines that had deepened around his eyes, the gray beginning to thread through his black hair, the way he looked at her, not with the casual assumption of ownership that had marked their early marriage, but with conscious, deliberate love. "Yes," she said simply. "You have." He pulled her closer, buried his face in her hair. "I love you," he murmured. "I know." She pressed a kiss to his temple. "I love you too." They sat like that for a long time. Two people who had almost lost everything, who had fought their way back to each other, who had built something stronger and truer than what had come before. Later that evening, as they walked through the garden with Niccolò between them, each of them holding one of his small hands, Cassiano made a decision. "I want another one," he said. Elisabetta turned to him. "Another what?" "Child." He met her eyes. "I missed so much with Niccolò. The pregnancy, the birth, those first 3 months." His voice roughened. "I want the chance to be there for everything. From the beginning." She was quiet. For a moment he worried he had pushed too far, asked for too much. Then, "I've been thinking the same thing," she admitted. "You have. For a few weeks now." She smiled softly. "I wasn't sure how to bring it up." Relief flooded through him. "So, we're doing this?" "We're considering it." She squeezed his hand. "Let's talk more. Make sure we're both ready. Whatever you want." "I want," she said carefully, "to make this decision together, as partners." Partners. It was a word she never would have used 2 years ago. Now it felt like the most natural thing in the world. 6 months later, Elisabetta told him she was pregnant. She did it simply over breakfast while Nicolo was busy smearing jam on his face, by sliding a positive test across the table. Cassiano stared at it, then at her, then back at the test. Are you? 8 weeks. She smiled. According to the doctor. He rose from his chair, rounded the table, pulled her to her feet and wrapped his arms around her. Grazie, he whispered. Grazie, amore mio. For what? For this. He pulled back to look at her. For giving me another chance. For building this life with me. For. He shook his head, overwhelmed. For everything. She cupped his face in her hands. You earned it, she said. Every day for the past 2 years. You earned it. Nicolo, watching his parents with bright, curious eyes, chose that moment to hurl a spoon across the room. Papa, he announced proudly. Cassiano laughed. Actually laughed. A sound that had become commonplace in this house, in this life, in this second chance he had never deserved but had somehow received. Yes, Piccolo, he said, turning to his son with tears in his eyes. Papa is right here, and he would be, for all of it, forever. The pregnancy was everything Cassiano had hoped for, and everything he had missed. He was there for the first ultrasound, watching the tiny heartbeat flutter on the screen, his tattooed hand gripping Elisabetta's while tears streamed silently down his face. He was there for the morning sickness, holding her hair back, bringing her crackers and ginger tea, canceling meetings without a second thought when she needed him. He was there for the cravings, driving into Palermo at midnight for gelato, laughing at the absurdity of a mafia boss standing in line at a 24-hour gelateria. He was there for the kicks, pressing his hand against her growing belly, feeling their daughter move beneath his palm, whispering promises in Italian that he intended to keep. Daughter. They learned the gender at 20 weeks. A girl. Cassiano had cried again. Something that had become remarkably common in the past 2 years, and immediately begun planning a nursery that would rival any princess's chambers. She doesn't need a palace, Elisabetta had laughed. She's getting one anyway. Cassiano. She's going to have everything, amore mio. His voice had softened. Everything her mother deserved and didn't always receive. Elisabetta had stopped arguing after that. The months passed in a blur of preparations and joy. Nicolo was fascinated by his mother's changing body, constantly asking questions that his parents answered with varying degrees of success. Baby in there? He would ask, pointing at Elisabetta's belly. Yes, tesoro. Your little sister. When she come out? Soon. Can I help? Cassiano had nearly choked on his espresso at that one. But he loved watching his son's excitement. Loved seeing the family he had almost destroyed growing stronger and larger. Loved knowing that his daughter would never know the cold, distant father he had once been. She would only know this version of him. The one who had learned. The one who had changed. The one who showed up. Valentina Moretti was born on a spring morning, in the same hospital where her brother had come into the world. But this time Cassiano was there. He held Elisabetta's hand through every contraction, talked her through the hardest moments, caught her when she collapsed against him, exhausted and triumphant. And when the doctor placed their daughter in his arms, this tiny, perfect creature with dark hair and her mother's hazel eyes, Cassiano understood something he had only glimpsed before. This was what he had been fighting for. Not power, not territory, not legacy. This, a family that chose each other, every day, despite everything, because of everything. She's beautiful, he whispered. Elisabetta, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at him. She looks like you. God help her. I thought the same thing about Nicolo. She reached up to touch his face. But you turned out all right. Eventually, she agreed. He leaned down and kissed her, gently, reverently, with all the love he had spent years learning to express. Thank you, he murmured against her lips. For what? For not giving up on me. Even when I gave you every reason to. I did give up, she reminded him. I walked away. But you answered when Dr. Ferraro called. He pulled back to look at her. You reached out. You gave me the chance I didn't deserve. I gave Nicolo a father, she corrected. I didn't know what would happen with us. And now, she looked at him for a long moment. At the man she had married 12 years earlier. The man who had broken her heart. The man who had spent the past 2.5 years proving that people could change. Truly fundamentally change when they were willing to do the work. Now, she said softly. I can't imagine my life without you. It was everything. It was more than he deserved. And he would spend the rest of his days making sure she never regretted saying it. That evening, Nicolo met his sister for the first time. Luciana brought him to the hospital. His small face pressed against the window of the nursery in desperate curiosity. That one? He asked, pointing at a random baby. No, Tesoro. That one. No. Which one, Nana? Luciana laughed softly and lifted him so he could see better. There, she said, pointing to the bassinet near the window. The one with the pink blanket. That's your sister. Nicolo stared. For a long moment, he was completely silent. An unusual state for a 2-year-old who had inherited his father's commanding presence. Then, she's small. She'll grow. Can she play with me? Not yet. But soon. How soon? A few months. Nicolo's face fell. That's forever. Luciana smiled. It will pass quickly. Trust Nana. Later, when Nicolo was finally allowed into the room, he approached the bed where Elisabetta held Valentina with the gravity of a child who understood something important was happening. Cassiano lifted him onto the bed beside his mother. Gently, Cassiano warned. Be very gentle. Nicolo nodded solemnly. He leaned forward, peering at Valentina's tiny face. She blinked up at him, those hazel eyes already bright with curiosity. Hello, Nicolo whispered. I'm your brother. Valentina made a small sound, something between a coo and a gurgle. Nicolo's face split into the widest grin Cassiano had ever seen. She talked to me, he announced. Mama. She talked to me. She did. Elisabetta agreed, her own eyes glistening. She's saying hello. I'll teach her everything, Nicolo continued, already planning. How to walk. How to throw balls. How to make Papa laugh. That's very kind of you, Piccolo. She's my sister. Nicolo said it with absolute certainty. I have to take care of her. Cassiano felt something tighten in his chest. I have to take care of her. His son, barely 2 years old, already understood something Cassiano himself had taken decades to learn. Family wasn't about power or obligation. It was about protection, about showing up, about choosing the people you loved, over and over again, until choosing them became as natural as breathing. 6 months later, the Moretti family sat for a portrait. It was Luciana's idea, a formal photograph to commemorate the life they had built from the wreckage of Cassiano's mistakes. They gathered in the garden of the Taormina villa, surrounded by olive trees and Mediterranean light. Elisabetta wore a simple cream dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. Cassiano wore a charcoal suit with an open collar, the Italian script on his neck visible above his shirt. Nicolo, nearly 3 years old now, stood between them in a miniature suit that matched his father's. And Valentina, 6 months old and already showing signs of her mother's stubborn personality, sat in Elisabetta's arms wearing a white dress with delicate lace trim. Everyone look at the camera, the photographer instructed. Cassiano glanced at his family, at the woman who had given him a second chance, at the son who had brought them back together, at the daughter who represented everything he had almost lost, at the life he had spent the past 3 years learning to deserve. Sorridi, amore mio, Elisabetta murmured. Smile. He did. And when the photograph was developed, it would show something remarkable. Not a mafia boss, not a businessman, not a man feared across Italy, just a father, a husband, a man who had learned the hard way what really mattered, and a family that had chosen to rebuild itself from the ashes of its own destruction. 5 years later, The estate outside Palermo had become a place of joy. Niccolò was 7 now, tall for his age, with his father's steel-gray eyes and his mother's gentle heart. He attended a private school in the city but spent every weekend at home, running through the gardens with Valentina at his heels. Valentina was 5, fierce and stubborn and beautiful, with dark curly hair and a personality that reminded everyone of Luciana in her youth. She had her father wrapped around her tiny finger and knew it. And there was one more, Marco, born 2 years after Valentina. 3 years old now, with his mother's hazel eyes and his father's serious expression. The unexpected blessing that had completed their family. On the anniversary of the phone call, 7 years to the day since Cassiano had learned he was a father, the family gathered for dinner at the estate. Luciana sat at the head of the table, 75 now but still sharp, still elegant, still fixing her son with looks that reminded him he could always do better. Marcello was there too, retired from active service but still a fixture at family events. The scar above his eyebrow had faded slightly with age, but his loyalty had never wavered. And at the center of it all, Cassiano and Elisabetta, sitting side by side, hands intertwined beneath the table, watching their children laugh and argue and love each other with the fierce, protective intensity that characterized everything Moretti. "You're quiet tonight," Elisabetta murmured. Thinking. About what? He looked at her. At the lines that had appeared around her eyes over the past 7 years. At the gray beginning to thread through her chestnut hair. At the woman who had walked away from him when he deserved nothing less, and had somehow found her way back. About how close I came to losing all of this. Her grip tightened on his hand. But you didn't. No. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. I didn't. Papa. Valentina's voice cut through the moment. Niccolò won't share the bread. I'm not sharing because she already had 3 pieces. Niccolò protested. Children, Luciana said calmly. There is plenty of bread for everyone. Valentina asked politely. Niccolò, your sister's appetite is not your concern. Yes, Nana, they chorused. Elisabetta laughed softly. Some things never change. No, Cassiano agreed, watching his mother manage his children with the same firm grace she had once used on him. But some things do. Like what? Like me. He turned to face her fully. 7 years ago, I was a man who had destroyed his own marriage through carelessness and arrogance, who had driven away the only woman who ever loved him without fear, who didn't even know he had a son. And now I'm a man who knows exactly what he has. His voice dropped. And I will never, never take it for granted again. Elisabetta studied his face. The same face she had fallen in love with 20 years earlier. Changed now. Softened. Marked by time and experience and the hard-won wisdom of a man who had learned from his failures. I believe you, she said. You do. I've believed you for years, Cassiano. She smiled. I just like hearing you say it. He laughed. Actually laughed. The same genuine sound that had become common in this house, in this family, in this life he had built from the ashes of his mistakes. I'll say it as often as you need to hear it. Good. She leaned over and kissed him, quickly, softly, but with all the passion that had only grown stronger over the years. Because I need to hear it every day. Every day, he agreed. Forever. Forever. Later that evening, after the children had been put to bed and Luciana had retired to her rooms and Marcello had departed with promises to return for Sunday dinner, Cassiano and Elisabetta stood on the terrace overlooking the Mediterranean. The same terrace where they had first begun to rebuild. The same view that had witnessed their renewal ceremony. The same moonlight that had illuminated their faces as they promised to try again. Do you ever wonder? Elisabetta asked quietly. What would have happened if Dr. Ferraro hadn't called? Cassiano considered the question. Sometimes. And I thank God every day that she did. He pulled her closer. Because without that call, I would have spent the rest of my life believing I had lost you forever. Never knowing I had a son. Never getting the chance to become the man I should have been from the beginning. You might have changed anyway. Maybe. He shook his head. But I needed the wake-up call. I needed to know that my choices had consequences. That I had missed something irreplaceable. His voice roughened. I needed to see Nicolo's face and understand exactly what my carelessness had cost me. Elisabetta was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I almost didn't tell her to call. He looked at her. What? When I was lying in that hospital bed, thinking I might die. Her voice caught. I almost decided to let Nicolo go to foster care rather than contact you. I was so angry, so hurt, so determined to prove that I could do this without you. What changed your mind? Dr. Ferraro. Elisabetta smiled faintly. She asked me if my son deserved to know his father. Not if you deserved to know him, but if he deserved to know you. She met his eyes. And I realized that my anger wasn't more important than his future. That I didn't have the right to make that choice for him. Cassiano felt tears prick at his eyes. Thank you, he whispered, for putting him first. Even when I had given you every reason to hate me. I did hate you, she said it simply, without malice. For a long time, but hate and love aren't opposites, Cassiano. Indifference is, and I was never indifferent to you. And now, she turned in his arms, facing him fully. Now I love you more than I did on our wedding day. More than I did when Nicolo was born. More than I did when Valentina took her first steps or Marco said his first word. How is that possible? Because love isn't a fixed quantity. She reached up to cup his face. It grows. It changes. It becomes stronger when you nurture it and weaker when you neglect it. Her thumb traced the line of his jaw. And you have spent 7 years nurturing ours. I'll spend the rest of my life doing the same. I know, she smiled. That's why I stay. He kissed her then. Not gently, not quickly, but with all the passion and gratitude and love that had built up over 2 decades. Through betrayal and separation, through reconciliation and renewal, through 3 children and countless challenges and the daily choice to keep fighting for each other. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, the moon had risen higher over the Mediterranean. Take me to bed, she murmured. Gladly. He lifted her in his arms, easily, despite the years, and carried her through the terrace doors. Behind them, the sea stretched endlessly toward the horizon. And somewhere in the house, 3 children slept peacefully, unaware of the journey their parents had taken to reach this moment. Unaware that their family had been built on the ruins of heartbreak. Unaware that love, true love, sometimes required destruction before reconstruction. They only knew that their parents loved each other, that their father showed up, every day, without fail, and that was enough. It was everything. 10 years later, Cassiano Moretti retired at 60. Not because he had to, the Moretti family was stronger than ever, with Marcello's successor managing day-to-day operations with quiet competence. But because he wanted to, because he had spent the first 40 years of his life building an empire. And he wanted to spend the next 40 years enjoying the family he had almost lost. Nicolo was 17 now, preparing for university, with his father's strategic mind and his mother's emotional intelligence. He knew what his family was, what his father had done. He had chosen to pursue law instead, to use his inheritance and connections to help rather than harm. Cassiano had never been more proud. Valentina was 15. Fierce and brilliant and utterly terrifying to anyone who crossed her. She had inherited her great-grandmother's elegance and her father's temper, a combination that made her formidable in any situation. She wanted to run the foundation her mother had started, to expand it, to help women and children across Italy escape situations that seemed hopeless. Elisabetta had cried when she'd announced her plans. Marco was 13, quiet and serious, with a gift for music that seemed to come from nowhere. He spent hours at the piano, composing pieces that made his grandmother weep and his father stand in doorways, listening, wondering how he had helped create something so beautiful. And Cassiano himself, he was happy, truly, deeply, completely happy. The kind of happiness he had never believed possible when he was young and hungry and convinced that power was the answer to everything. the kind of happiness that could only come from learning the hard way what really mattered. On their 20th wedding anniversary, counting from the renewal ceremony, not the original wedding, Cassiano took Elisabetta back to the villa in Taormina, the same villa where they had rebuilt their marriage, the same villa where they had first begun to trust each other again, the same villa where, 17 years earlier, she had kissed him for the first time since walking out of his life. "Why here?" she asked as the car wound up the familiar driveway. "Because this is where we started over." He took her hand. "This is where you gave me a chance I didn't deserve. This is where I learned that forgiveness isn't a destination. It's a daily choice." She smiled, the same smile that still made his heart skip after all these years. "You've been reading poetry again. Luciana's influence." She would be proud. Cassiano's chest tightened. Luciana had passed away 3 years earlier, at 87. Surrounded by family and love and the knowledge that her son had finally become the man she had always believed he could be. Her last words to him had been simple. "You did well, figlio mio. You did well." He still heard them in his dreams. That evening, they sat on the terrace where everything had changed. The same view, the same moonlight, the same two people, older now, marked by time but stronger for it. "I have something for you," Cassiano said. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Elisabetta's eyes widened. "Cassiano, open it." She did. Inside was a ring. Not a new one. The engagement ring he had given her 20 years before the original wedding. The one she had left behind when she walked away. The one he had kept, all those years, waiting for the right moment to return it. "I've been holding on to this," he said quietly. "Waiting until I felt I had truly earned the right to give it back to you. And now I realize that I'll never feel like I've earned it. That I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you and falling short." He took the ring from the box and held it between them. "But I also realize that love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing, about showing up, about doing the work, every day, even when it's hard." Elisabetta was crying now. Silent tears streaming down her face. "So this isn't me giving you a ring," Cassiano continued. "This is me asking you, again, to let me spend the rest of my life showing you that I can be the man you deserve." She extended her hand. Slowly, deliberately, he slipped the ring onto her finger, where it had belonged all along. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, for the rest of our lives." She pulled him close. "And whatever comes after." He kissed her, deeply, thoroughly, with all the love he had spent 20 years learning to express. And when they finally pulled apart, the Mediterranean stretching endlessly before them and the stars wheeling overhead, Cassiano Moretti understood something he had been learning since that phone call 10 years earlier. Some prices were worth paying. Some choices led to pain. But some choices led to everything. And this family, this woman, this life he had built from the ruins of his own mistakes, this was everything. The end. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that second chances are possible. And that love, real love, is always worth fighting for. Comment below where you're watching from. I love seeing how far across the world these stories reach. Until next time, take care of the people who matter. Show up for them. Choose them. Every day. Every single day.